This is KTVO's Good Morning Heartland.
And welcome back. As we've already heard from Troy Moling, it's going to be a scorcher out there today and tomorrow. And with the heat comes risk for heat-related injuries. Today we have Dr. Justin Puckett from Complete Family Medicine here this morning to discuss what we need to watch out for and what we can do to prevent heat stroke and exhaustion. How are you doing today?
Doing great, thank you.
So what is the difference between a heat stroke and heat exhaustion?
Well, heat exhaustion is something that we've all experienced probably many times in our life. It's that time when we're outside, we're being active, and we recognize that we're getting a little bit too hot. We really start to develop thirst, we're sweating profusely, we notice that we're feeling warm, and other people might even notice that we're flushed. We might even get a little bit of dizziness, a little bit of a headache, and maybe even a mild amount of nausea. But it's really that sensation of I'm too hot, I need to get out of the heat, I need something to drink now. And heat stroke, on the other hand, is a life-threatening emergency, something that we would recognize and immediately activate EMS for, just as we would for a heart attack or a stroke. The same is true. That's why we call it heat stroke. And so heat stroke is going to present a little bit differently. It's usually a progression from heat exhaustion to heat stroke. And at that point with heat stroke, our body says, you know what, we've been trying to fight this heat and we're just not being successful. And so the heat regulatory system, the temperature regulatory system in our brain kind of shuts down. And so temperatures drift up. We typically stop sweating, and at that point our temperature rises as high as 105 to make the definition of heat stroke. And at that point, that little bit of change in temperature will set most of our organs into end organ failure.
Now let's talk about some of the symptoms that we need to look out for heat stroke.
Yeah, so looking for the heat, that you touch somebody that's extremely hot and that they aren't wet, that they have a throbbing headache that's more than just a little bit of an annoyance, but something that's truly pounding, dizziness and lightheadedness. And then part of the definition of heat stroke is that you really get some confusion and some mental status changes. Again, like I said, the skin will be red and dry. There's not going to be any presence of sweat because you've usually gotten rid of several of your electrolytes via sweating. You might develop weakness and cramps, and then the nausea and vomiting. Other things that you'll see is a rapid heartbeat, which may be either real strong and then progress towards weak. People sometimes will stop breathing, breathing really shallow, and then the confusion and the disorientation is kind of hallmark, and it can progress all the way towards seizures, unconsciousness, and even death.
All right, so obviously we know that if we do experience or see somebody experience heat stroke, to call 911 to get that medical treatment. What are there other things that we could do to kind of help them in the instance while we're waiting for those medical professionals to come to us? Yeah,
absolutely. Once 911's been called, then getting that person to a cool area. It doesn't have to be air conditioning, although if it's available close by, that would be great. But even just getting to the shade, taking off any unnecessary clothing, and then beginning to cool the body. And so that can be done with everything from using what you've got around you as far as something to fan, to try to keep the air moving, or ideally if you've got access to some sort of a cool pack or an ice pack, then we want to cool the core body. And so we do that by placing ice packs on the neck, in the armpits, the groin, along the back, so that we can cool that core temperature from the inside out. And then just being prepared and watching for some of those other things, maybe for seizures, and making sure that you've cleared the environment so that there's nothing going to hurt if that person were to have a seizure.
All right. Now, when it comes to heat stroke, who is at higher risk?
Well, we immediately think of the elderly because a lot of them stay in apartments and they don't recognize the heat, and then so that's one. Anybody who's got chronic medical conditions, especially people taking medications that might stop them from being able to sweat and do some of the body's natural cooling techniques. And then infants, young kids are at risk. And so it's really important that we keep those little babies, they don't have much water to give, and so it doesn't take long for them to get pretty dehydrated.
Now, what are some ways to prevent heat stroke? or heat exhaustion?
When you're outside wearing light-colored clothing so that you can reflect and not absorb as much of that sun heat, staying into the shade as much as possible. We know that just being out in the direct sun will increase that heat index by an additional 15 degrees.
Wow.
Watching for the heat index, because even like what we were talking today earlier, is that the temperature might not be as high as what we think, but once that humidity stays above 60%, our ability to sweat and for that sweat to evaporate drastically goes down. And so we want to really watch for those things. And then drinking plenty of water, that's probably the most key thing. Drinking water, you can so to speak, prime the pump and get plenty of water in before the day starts, and then continuing to drink frequently and watching to make sure that you keep your urine a real light yellow or almost clear. And if you notice that you've been working outside and been sweating profusely and you haven't had to urinate for several hours, then that can be a good warning sign, and so you need to get to drinking right away. Okay.
Now, when somebody experiences a heat stroke, are they at most risk to have it reoccur down the line in the next summer or again in that summer? How does that work?
At least for the next few weeks, we really know that the body's heat regulatory system is still going to be a little fragile. So once you've had heat exhaustion and definitely heat stroke, then you're really, those next 2 to 3 weeks need to stay completely out of any extreme heat conditions, because you can quickly jump in. It's like many things in our body. The second time around, it doesn't take as much to take us to that bad place of heat stroke, and the effects can be more severe. And even after, some people will describe that they had one heat stroke 20 years ago and they're still more sensitive to the heat, and that may very well be the case. And so just listening to your body is number one.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Puckett. What we'll do is put everything on our website at heartlandconnection.com, and we'll link up Dr. Puckett's information with Complete Family Medicine. Again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.